This is another in my series of talks about the film Point Blank, 1967, directed by John Boorman, starring Lee Marvin and Angie Dickinson. My book on the film, published with the British Film Institute's Classic series, will be coming out on September 7th. I'm very honored to be part of the BFI Classics series. These are lovely little books. They're about 90 pages or so, have gorgeous stills and film clips. They are fantastic introductions to a classic film, and also they provide in-depth analysis of this film. So I would encourage you, if you have not seen Point Blank, to check it out. One of the great films of all time. And perhaps buy the book, and maybe that will help you appreciate it in more detail. What I want to do in this talk is address Lee Marvin's acting style. I'm going to show you a 30-second clip showing Marvin in his role as Walker, the film's protagonist, making his way with great energy and fury through the Los Angeles airport. He has just found out where his wife lives, and he is seeking her out. She has betrayed him with his best friend. The best friend shot him and left him for dead. She thinks he is dead. So what you see in this scene is not only Marvin's physical presence as an actor, but also you can see some of the montage filmmaking that Boorman uses to compress space and time. We move back and forth between Marvin's Walker clomping furiously through the airport and his wife Lynn readying herself for the day using makeup and mirrors. Her character is often associated with makeup and mirrors. The film saying that she chose appearance and wealth over Walker. So here is the scene. So, the first thing to note about Lee Marvin's acting is his physical presence. He was a big man, 6'2", muscular, a former soldier, kept in fantastic shape. His face like granite, almost like a granite mask. His eyes, you can't see them here, were an ice blue, a chilly ice blue. And you can see his hair here prematurely gray. Marvin was in his 40s when this film was shot. John Boorman, the director, upon first meeting Lee Marvin, said that when you walked into Lee Marvin's presence, you felt everything around you had shrunk. The chairs were smaller, the tables were smaller, you yourself felt smaller. And when Boorman met Marvin, Marvin was the biggest movie star in the world. He had won an Academy Award for his dual role in Cat Ballou. Before that, he'd been in a wonderful action film, a buddy action film called The Professionals, starring Burt Lancaster as well. And when Boorman met him, Marvin was making the film Dirty Dozen, directed by Robert Aldrich. So Marvin is an imposing figure. His physicality has a fierceness and a fury to it that can really be overwhelming. And Boorman draws upon this physicality in the film. Oftentimes, he will have a scene where Marvin says absolutely nothing, but just sits or stands. And miraculously, almost, his silence begins to speak to the other characters in the film. Boorman tells a funny story. He talks about how when he and Marvin were discussing whether they would make the film or not, neither of them liked the script very much. They ended up revising it quite extensively. And finally, when Marvin said, okay, I will make the film, but only on one condition, that we do not use this script. And Boorman said, yes, I agree. We'll not use that script. And Marvin picked the script up and threw it out the window, all these white pages fluttering down to the ground. And for Boorman, this was a perfect example of how Marvin was always trying to find the right gesture. He always valued action over word. He thought that made his acting more effective. I should also tell you that when Lee Marvin died, he told his wife right before he died, give John Boorman whatever he wants from my things. And the wife called John Boorman, and Boorman said, I would like the shoes that Lee Marvin wore when he made this scene in Point Blank. Well, Boorman has since donated his papers and other important artifacts to the University of Indiana. And among those artifacts are indeed the shoes. And I've seen them, and they're gigantic. They're size 13, heavy, leathered, beautiful split-toed shoes. Well, in addition to Marvin's physicality is his stoicism. I alluded to this earlier. He is very much an actor who, in valuing gesture over word, tends to play characters who simply do not say much. He tends to play character. Well, that is not true. Let me dial that back. Marvin also can play characters with the gift of the gab. He, in Dirty Dozen, is this wry, sardonic colonel. And in earlier movies like The Big Heat, he's a very nasty, verbally nasty, insulting, heavy. So I'll say that Marvin in this film, and there are some others, chose to act more with body than word, and chose a character who simply does not speak much. Now, this was a time in the 60s American cinema when the laconic action hero was quite popular. You can think of Steve McQueen in Bullitt. Like Marvin, barely says a word. You can think of Clint Eastwood in his Man with No Name trilogy, directed by Sergio Leone. So the idea of Marvin's physical presence, big man, the idea of Marvin's laconic playing of his character, two major parts of Marvin as an actor. But these two qualities, the physical presence and the minimalist acting style, really don't separate Marvin much from someone like Steve McQueen in Bullitt, also Steve McQueen in The Getaway. And they don't really separate Marvin much from someone like Clint Eastwood. What separates Marvin from those two actors, I would say, and this really shows in this film, is that Marvin has a vulnerability to him. He's not simply the quiet, tough guy. He is a man who is tortured on the inside. He is a man struggling with great pain. He is a man who is trying to hold it all together. Just think about what you just saw. He's walking furiously down this hallway. What kind of man does that? He's not cool here. He's not detached here. He's desperate. He's walking like a desperate man would. And in scenes right after the one you're seeing, we watch him stalk his wife in a car. He's sort of trying to find out where she is and where he can find her. And he looks heartbroken, forlorn, lovelorn. And Marvin's face, if you can look at it closely, suggests this duplicity. The ice-cold blue eyes, the taciturn, mask-like face. But his lips are very sensual. They're soft, they're sensual lips, and they do suggest a kind of vulnerability. And this film, even though it's about a man trying to find retribution for being betrayed, it's also a man who's been deeply traumatized because he's been betrayed. He's lost his wife with whom he was deeply in love. He's lost his best friend. And he was left for dead. And now here he is trying to find retribution. But it's not simply a cool action film. It is that. It's slick, it's fun to watch, but also it's very much about a man who is deeply tortured. So that third part of Marvin's acting, the vulnerability, the subtle vulnerability, I think is what sets him aside from the Eastwoods and the McQueens of the world. And there's a fourth part of Marvin's acting as well in this film, Point Blank. It doesn't necessarily come across in this scene, and that is he has a great sense of humor. This sense of humor comes out beautifully in films like The Professionals and The Dirty Dozen, where he plays a kind of world-weary, sardonic man who's extremely good at what he does, but at the same time sort of makes light of everything he does with a grim sense of humor. So we see that here. We see Marvin engaging in over-the-top acts of violence, which don't actually hurt anyone. And it's almost like he is satirizing traditional male violence. His violence is so over the top that it becomes funny. And there are other moments in the film where his understated reactions to extreme violent situations is funny as well. So that's the fourth part of Marvin's acting in this film I wanted to focus on. His sense of humor, very subtle, nuanced, comical persona, which mainly shows up in his interactions with Angie Dickinson. They have a flirtation going on, and she brings out sides of him that the man world cannot. So, Lee Marvin, what a treat. One of the great actors of all time. Without Lee Marvin, we would not have someone like, say, Ryan Gosling in Drive, deeply influenced by Lee Marvin. And we would not have someone like Keanu Reeves in the John Wick films. Those are very Marvin-esque. That's a very Marvin-esque character, John Wick. Doesn't say much, speaks with gesture, but yet is deeply pained, loss of his wife, loss of his first dog, but has a sense of humor. The way he articulates his monosyllabic answers, especially to his friend Winston, have a very Marvin-esque humor to them. So enjoy Lee Marvin in this film, and we'll talk more later on.